Before you toss those Thanksgiving leftovers, consider composting. To discuss why that might be easier than you imagine, we're joined by Tiffany Bess, founder of Apple Rabbit Compost. Good morning, Tiffany.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. Also, Christina Kelcourse, co-owner of Sunshine Organics and Compost. Good morning, Christina.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. So, Tiffany, what is the problem that composting aims to solve?
So composting is trying to treat our food material. I don't like to call it waste, but rather as a resource and get it back into the cycle that it needs to be in. So instead of sending it to the landfill where it releases methane gas and other greenhouse gas emissions, we want to get that back into the soil where it belongs.
And so, food waste is, as we kind of alluded to, is a really big environmental impact. I know you don't like to call it waste, but the food, the world wastes an estimated 2.5 billion tons of food every year. The EPA says about a third of the food produced worldwide never makes it to the table. And, it takes up a precious resource, which is landfill space.
It does. Not only landfill space, it's also wasting a lot of energy. It's wasting a lot of energy. It's wasting the cropland used to grow that material, labor, transportation costs, a lot, and a lot of fresh water as well.
You're whispering, Christina.
Oh,
Go ahead. You can chime in anytime.
I was just going to say, in addition, you were wasting a lot of water. About 105 billion gallons of water is used to produce the food that we're going to be eating on Thanksgiving. So when we waste half of that food, you're wasting that water as well.
Explain how the water comes into play.
Well, you're using water to grow crops and feed livestock. And then when you feed them and you water plants, and then the plants go to your Thanksgiving table and you throw them in the trash, that water has been wasted.
So this is a uniquely intense problem in the United States. So we produce more food waste than any other country, an estimated 60 million tons. That's an average of 325 pounds a person. I've seen it compared to throwing almost 1,000 apples straight into the garbage per person. And so why is the footprint so heavy in the United States?
I'm not sure the reason in the United States. I think we have a culture of what's easy and maybe overeating. And I think a lot of restaurants are guilty of putting too much on your plate. I know when I go out to eat, it's usually too much. So I think there's an overconsumption of customers and the community wanting more food than what they can actually eat.
So Thanksgiving is kind of a prime time to talk about this because that's sort of baked into the whole experience, right? Is excess and a surplus and kind of this cornucopia of foods. But, because of that, we tend to make more food than we need. People fill their plates more than they're going to eat. I saw a number that there are the equivalent of 8 million whole birds thrown away. And that 42% of the food that's thrown away on an individual's plate is turkey. So there seems to be a lot of turkey waste. What is that an opportunity to kind of think about food waste and get people on that wavelength, Tiffany?
Yeah, so my partner is actually a chef, so we think about food in the whole spectrum, if you will. And so being mindful of what you're actually creating, not producing more than what people can actually eat, and getting creative with your leftovers too. Being mindful, using your freezer, utilizing this wonderful machine that everyone has in their kitchen, a refrigerator and a freezer, and just making sure that you're just a little bit more mindful about what you're putting on your plate. Don't fill it up more than what you can actually reasonably eat. If you got to go back for seconds, that's always good. But don't just like pile it on unnecessarily.
Of course, it's a holiday that also celebrates leftovers, which is sort of a rarity. I mean, there's not a lot of other foods that people are like deliberately looking forward to eating the next day. And so there is that mindfulness of that, but still an enormous amount of food and extra pies and extra everything after that meal. Not all of that can be composted, right?
Mm, I mean, anything that was once alive can be composted. It just depends on the method by which you're doing it. So some things you, as a home composter, aren't going to be able to compost in your backyard pile. But if you have an industrial facility like Sunshine Organics available to you, then you can compost these things like meat and dairy and high fat, high sugar foods, which are usually things that you want to avoid in your backyard compost pile.
So who should consider composting? I mean, is this the kind of thing that you think every person should be considering, or is it a certain?
Everyone.
Okay.
If you eat food, you should be composting.
Okay.
And every major city should have a commercial composting company or facility to bring large-scale food waste.
And so Sunshine is unique in Jacksonville in terms of being the first organic composting facility, like a large scale facility. Are you the only currently?
We are.
Okay. And so what is the difference between having a facility like that that's available to people and people who are just trying to do an at-home compost? And we'll kind of get to what that is, in a little bit.
Sure. So, like Tiffany was saying, everybody should be composting. A lot of people everybody should be composting in their backyard, but it is limited to what you can put in there. You're not going to want to put a lot of meats and dairies, manures, things like that in your home compost facility. Those home compost bins don't get hot enough. The difference with a large commercial facility is that we can take a lot more. We can take a lot more food waste, and that our compost piles get hotter. So we are able to take the materials that you can't put into a home bin, and the compost piles get hot enough to kill off things like E. coli and other pathogens like that would get into the food waste at your home compost.
If you're just joining us, we are talking about trying to solve the problem of food waste with composting. We're talking to two local experts, and you can join our conversation at 904-549-2937. You can also email First Coast Connect at wjct.org, or you can reach out on social media. We've got a call from Peter on the South Side. Good morning, Peter. Go ahead.
Yes, hi. Good morning. I know this is a show about composting, but I think your listeners should know that the local grocery store chains do a lot for local homeless shelters. So, for instance, I volunteer with Mission House at Jack's Beach, and for Feeding Northeast Florida, we pick up food that is going out of date, and we take it to homeless shelters. So Feeding Northeast Florida and the individual shelters and the local grocery stores do their best to make sure that the food is put to good use and not composted.
That's great. Thanks, Peter. And thanks for the work that you do. Obviously, that's a great way to keep things from winding up in the landfill, is to repurpose them.
Yeah, there's a there's a food waste hierarchy, and making sure food that is still edible goes to human consumption first, and then if it's not good for human consumption, then it can go to feed animals like pigs and other livestock. And then composting is a little bit further down there. It's, a step before going to the landfill. So there's definitely other ways to divert and save that material from going to the landfill before it even becomes compost.
At an earlier stage. Yeah. So Florida set a statewide goal of recycling 75% of materials by 2020, Christina, and they definitely missed that mark. I think DEP, the Department of Environmental Protection, estimates that yard waste has an almost 60% recycling rate in 2022, but food waste just 6%. I'm surprised that it's such a disparity between those two. Why is that?
I think that there's a lack of facilities and infrastructure, that most major cities in Florida do not have a facility where you can compost food. It's a very intensive, hard process to get permitted in the state of Florida. They make it very difficult. Per code and policy in Florida, we had to be licensed as a landfill.
Mm-hmm.
So it took a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of resources to get a facility like ours up and running. So I think it discourages a lot of people that maybe would want to do something like that. So it's going to limit people. I do know that the Florida DEP is addressing that right now. They're looking at updating those codes. It hasn't happened yet, but they are looking at it, and they have some drafts of things that they're presenting. So we'll see if that goes through.
I imagine, I mean, if you're trying to get a quote unquote landfill permitted in any neighborhood where there's even a trace of residential, that would be a really tall order.
Right. And I think it's a lack of education as well, because when you come and visit our site, and we are open for tours, and we have had several city council members come out, Mayor Donna Deegan has come out. We've even had state senators come out to our site and visit. And when one of the comments that they say is, wow, there's really no smells. It kind of smells like the forest floor, kind of like a wood chippy smell. So it's an education thing. So yes, getting a landfill near residential, when people don't have the education of knowing what a facility really is, I think it's hard. And the problem is that we need to be near food sources. So when you put a facility too far out of the city, then you don't have what we call feedstock, which is the food waste and the yard waste. The haulers are not going to bring the food waste to us because we're too far away. So we do have to be close by to make it work.
I want to take a call from Don in North Jacksonville. Good morning, Don. Go ahead.
Hello.
Good morning, Don. Go ahead.
Yes, I just wanted to share that I lived in Asia for a few years as a teacher, and over there they separate all the food from the regular trash, and they compost it. And it's practice, normal practice in China and Taiwan. And I see that here in Duval schools, where I work part-time as a sub, and also in Texas, it's all over the U.S., where there's so much food wasted in schools, where kids don't eat like half the food or most of the food. All that food ends up in the trash. And it seems very, not only environmentally bad or wasteful, but also morally, considering so many people are dying of hunger around the world. And I thought that what there needs to be done so this can be, maybe this concept can be created or followed in the U.S., like approach school districts and say, hey, can we get you guys to join this effort to compost and collect all that food that is thrown away and wasted in schools and cafeterias?
Yeah, thanks, Don. I mean, certainly food waste, when we're experiencing food insecurity in this country, is a big deal. There have been estimates that the amount of food we throw away could feed each of the 47 million people that experience food insecurity on a daily basis, the equivalent of 5 meals. So it's no small thing, but I think he's getting into, again, that food path, I guess, that it goes through. And there are different points where it diverges in ways to save.
I think Chris really hit the nail on the head with the lack of infrastructure for composting, and that's really the biggest thing. Is, now that there is a facility here in Jacksonville, what we lack is hauling capability. So to be able to actually get that material and bring it to these facilities is kind of the next piece of this puzzle, and that's kind of what we're lacking at this point.
I want to talk about that, but I want to take a call from Angela on the South Side. Good morning, Angela. Go ahead. Angela, good morning. Go ahead.
Hi there. I'm interested, and Chris received the USDA grant for composting, and I'm interested in what are her next steps and what does she need to expand her operation there.
Good question. And so you did get a healthy-sized grant from the USDA, almost $5 million for this Jacksonville operation. So tell us what that money has gone towards and the infrastructure that you have in place.
Yep. So the infrastructure that we have in place currently is that we have a full-scale, large-scale compost facility where we are taking food waste and yard waste currently and processing it into a healthy, rich soil.
And where is it located?
We are located on Buffalo Ave in the Talleyrand area.
Okay.
And so the grant that we received allows us to improve our equipment. We were able to add a couple of large trucks so we can deliver some compost to the agriculture community that is mostly on the outskirts, outside of Duval. There are a few small farms and agriculture in Duval that we also deliver to. And then we also received a large piece of equipment that would help us create biochar.
Okay. And biochar is basically when you're kind of burning some of this, or at least heating it very, very hot and creating a sort of a fertilizer.
Sort of. So that's a good explanation. It's kind of it looks like a charcoal, but it's not, and it is the burning of organics. So we use wood, and you can burn food waste. You can burn other things, but we use wood, and it captures. It doesn't actually allow the air to release or any of the smoke. It's all captured in. It's all in an enclosed system. We actually get carbon credits for what we're doing.
Okay.
And then you can use the biochar for a lot of different things. One of the major things that we'll use it for is for filtering water. We've been approached by the state to look at some studies to study the filtration of biochar to help with the algae blooms.
Oh, interesting.
That
To kind
Florida
of
is.
divert some of that.
Yep. So biochar, the best way to kind of think about it is it's kind of like that black stuff that you see in your Brita water filter when you first get it. That's the filter. That it's filtering out. What it does is it attracts different materials. All the bad ones get attracted to the biochar, and the biochar holds onto it. And it's used as a fertilizer because it's got a lot of carbon, and it captures a lot of the different materials that plants eat.
So, Tiffany, what are the steps in terms of collecting material, and if you're not doing a home compost, like what do you need to do to get it to a place that does that kind of recycling? Are there pickup services available? Do people just have to kind of put it in a bin and haul it over to their local compost facility?
So that's where Apple Rabbit Compost comes in. So when I started my composting business in 2016, that was before we had an industrial facility. And so I was collecting and processing food scraps on my own. I operate under the threshold that requires the permitting, the landfill permitting. So I operate as a community composter. It's bigger than backyard composting, but it's definitely not at the industrial size. And so we provide a couple composting services primarily to the urban core neighborhoods of Jacksonville. So the 32202 through '07 zip code. So those are your like urban core neighborhoods. And we come by every week and we collect food scraps from our subscribers. Or we also have drop off subscriptions at the Riverside Arts Market or the Murray Hill Farmers Market, where our subscribers can bring their material there too.
And what are they putting their material in? Do they need a special container? How much are they usually, does a household deliver if they have a subscription for a weekly drop off?
So we provide a 5-gallon bucket with a compostable liner, and so they get to fill that up as much as they need to. Hopefully, it's not a lot. Even though they are composting, we still want them to be mindful about how much waste that they actually are producing. Because we do find that sometimes when people start a composting service, they'll actually start wasting more. Because they're like, oh, it's getting composted.
Wow,
So,
interesting.
it's okay. But I think that eating it is, it's that first part of the food waste hierarchy. So it needs to be consumed first. Composting is just kind of a last resort. But yeah, so they get a 5-gallon bucket, they fill it up. And then depending on their subscription, we either come by and pick it up off their porch or they take it to the market.
And so what labor is required from your customers? Do they have to do that layering of the compost? Do they just throw all of their material into the bin and you take care of it?
Yeah, they just throw all of their material into the bin and then we take care of it. So we'll take food scraps and then we'll also take things like your paper towels and compostable materials. Pizza boxes are not recyclable, but they are compostable. So we just ask that our subscribers cut them up into smaller pieces and they can throw those in their bucket. We've been able to tell a few times when somebody's had a pizza party because it's just completely full of pizza boxes.
Right.
And that's always really exciting. And then we also we do a pumpkin collection every year as well. We started in 2016 when we first opened up the business.
Like after Halloween?
And so we collect it from our subscribers, and we encourage the general public to bring their pumpkins to some of our drop-off sites. But Chris has really taken that further because she's collecting it on a larger scale. So
Yeah, I just want to say, I think that Jacksonville is incredibly lucky. We have two resources here in Jacksonville that a lot of other major cities in Florida do not have. We have a very strong community composter, which is Tiffany, who can pick up in certain locations for people that want to do food scraps, and also at the farmers market, which is fantastic, or the Riverside Arts Market. And then you have a commercial compost facility, which again, most cities don't have. So Tiffany's collecting pumpkins, which is great. We also collected pumpkins. So after Halloween, we took in 72,000 pounds of wasted pumpkins, which
Wow.
is about the equivalent of 3 tractor trailer trucks worth of just pumpkins that would have normally gone to the landfill. So you have to think about that as a resource for Jacksonville. When food waste goes to the landfill, it's creating emissions. And the EPA did a study in 2023, which was unprecedented. They've never studied landfill waste before that's focused specifically on emissions. This is the first time. And what they found was that landfills are actually the third largest producer of emissions.
Greenhouse gas emissions.
Greenhouse gas emissions, which is huge. That's a big deal. So our landfills are polluting our air. And what they did find also was that food waste is the number one material in the landfill creating those emissions. So you think about these 3 tractor trailer trucks of pumpkins going to the landfill, that's like regular practice. And if your city doesn't have the resources like Apple Rabbit and Sunshine, it's all going to the landfill.
And so food waste can produce carbon, it can produce methane, both of which, are contributors to a warming planet. And compost still produces some carbon, but it really cuts the methane because it is sort of eliminating that gas production.
Yeah, so composting itself is a completely different process than landfilling waste. So landfills by nature are storage facilities, and they're anaerobic, and they lack the oxygen, they lack the water needed to convert this carbon and nitrogen material into compost. And so that process is inherently disruptive, whereas composting is it's a completely different process. So it doesn't have those same sort of effects, and that's why you don't have like the odor issues from a properly maintained compost facility,
Uh-huh.
because it does have that water, it does have that oxygen, and so it's not an anaerobic process. And the anaerobic microorganisms are what creates all those big baddie emissions.
Interesting. I want to ask you though, I mean, in terms of you have this facility, Sunshine Organics, Christina, the city did try this pilot program last year. The city council voted to give a 6-month test, seeing if, a city, I guess they provided kind of a truck and some assistance, worked with Sunshine Organics, but ultimately came away saying it shouldn't be continued because it didn't work on that scale. So remind us, first of all, what that project entailed, and then sort of what the pilot program showed you.
So I don't think they said that it didn't work. I think what was happening is that Sunshine and the city didn't have a hauler. So during the pilot program, the city donated a truck, basically a garbage truck, to pick up the food waste. After the pilot program, the city said, the truck's going to go back to being a garbage truck. And Sunshine we don't have garbage trucks. We don't pick up. We're just a facility. So until we find, like Tiffany had mentioned earlier, until we find a hauler company that can pick up the food waste, we are kind of missing the bridge between picking up, getting the food waste to the facility. And in Jacksonville right now, there's really no interested haulers that have stepped up to start picking up food waste. And it is a big process because you have to dedicate a truck, which costs a lot of money. You have to dedicate a driver. You have to have a salesperson to build a route to find the restaurants and grocery stores that want to compost. So there's labor involved, and the city wasn't going to do that. And we're not going to do that. We're a facility, so we just want to process and make good compost and get it to the farms and agriculture and landscaping. So that was the breakdown in the pilot.
Yeah. And so you were working at the time with about 15 restaurants. And I would guess that there you get the most bang for your buck with a restaurant because they are probably producing as much food waste as anybody.
I don't know about that. I think grocery stores probably would have more waste. I think the school systems, as one of the callers had mentioned, have a lot of waste. And I have been to schools outside of Florida and seen how they have conveyor belts for the kids that can put their compostable trays on the belt, and all plastic goes in the trash, and the kids put the food on the conveyor belt and it goes to the back where it's collected and goes to a compost facility. But we don't have that here. I don't think restaurants have a large scale amount of waste. They're kind of like in a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 process, like tier 1 being the most waste. Restaurants are probably tier 3.
But they do produce volume, right? So if they're more frugal with their food production than, say, I am in my kitchen, but they're obviously dealing with a lot more product.
They're definitely going to produce more food waste than a household.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We got an email from Brenda. She says, I love this subject. Thank you for introducing us to Sunshine Organics. Would we hear more about how we use this resource, and could we have ideas about composting at home?
I'll let Tiffany do the composting at home, but I'll just say the way to use. My husband and I started Sunshine Compost, mostly him, Mike Kelcourse. And one of the reasons we started it was because we were passionate about the food waste. And we wanted to divert food from the landfill because we knew that it was polluting our air and creating greenhouse gas emissions. But along the way, we have become very passionate about the actual soil. And the quality of soil matters, especially here in Florida, where our soil is so sandy. And with our development practices and construction practices, we deplete the soil, throw down plants, and they die. And it's because there's no nutrients in the soil. So we need to get people, we need to get residents, we need to get the city, municipalities using the actual compost, and landscapers using compost, because it'll help your plants, it'll save you money, it'll save water, it'll save fertilizer. So the actual compost itself is very important.
Yeah. And in terms of home composting.
So I do want to talk a little bit more about like the compost itself and its importance, especially in pertaining to Jacksonville specifically. So Chris talked about a lot of those benefits for composting. One of the things that I also really like about the material itself is its ability to remediate Brownsfields. So the compost itself is actually able to kind of take these bad
and brownfields are places that used to be industrial facilities and are polluted to some extent. And the state tries to repurpose them, or the federal government tries to repurpose them, but they do have some level of residual pollution.
Contamination, yes. So compost, you can actually utilize that to kind of negate these harmful pollutants in the soil. And I think that that's really important in a city that is tearing down buildings a lot and leaving them kind of abandoned for a long time, because it does cost a lot of money to remediate it. And I think composting is a really cost-effective way to fix that. And then also just the ability to prevent stormwater runoff, soil erosion. These are all things that are really important being a river city, being right on the water. I think composting is really important in Jacksonville for that reason alone. But as far as like composting at home, there's a lot of different methods, and Apple Rabbit Compost is actually able to kind of help figure out which method will work best for you in particular.
So you can do like consultations with people?
Exactly. So the primary methods that we kind of recommend to people that are more accessible and easy to do would be either like your traditional thermophilic bin composting, which is in your backyard. You have like a 3-foot by 3-foot bin that you're kind of layering with your green, which is your food scrap nitrogen material, and your brown carbon rich materials,
which is like the cardboard you mentioned.
The cardboard, leaves, all of that kind of like brown woody wood waste. And so you're going to be layering this material with your water. You need to make sure it's moist. Those microorganisms really need the oxygen and water to survive, to do their job, to work at turning that material into compost. And so by aerating it with a pitchfork, you're able to kind of feed those microorganisms, and they're able to do their job. You also have bokashi composting, which is a type of pre-composting method. It's actually a little different than almost everything we've been talking about today, because you are going to be using anaerobic microorganisms to ferment your material first. And so that actually just winds up speeding up the process. It allows you to compost things in your backyard that you would normally be avoiding, like meat and dairy and things like that.
And you avoid those generally because they can draw pests and rodents and maybe make more of a
Rodents and
smell.
pathogens and smells.
Yeah.
And so bokashi is able to kind of eradicate all of those issues. Your critters aren't attracted to bokashi material. It doesn't have an odor. It smells like pickles, like fermented food. And then there's also vermicomposting with worms, which is really fun. You're a little bit more limited with the type of material that you're going to use. Like, you're definitely not going to add meat and dairy to it unless you've bokashied it first. But they do eat a lot, and they eat it really, really quickly. And that's something that you can do in your house. You can do that in your apartment. You can do that on your balcony, in your laundry room.
It does require a commitment to worms, though. I
Yeah.
know well from my son's project. So we just have a short minute here left, but I just want to ask, I mean, if there was one thing that could be done to sort of scale this up, Christina, in, this area, what would be your wish?
I think my wish right now at this stage would be for the city and for landscapers and developers to start using local compost as opposed to just doing fill dirt where you're going to plant things and they're going to die. And as Tiffany said, it also helps with erosion. So here in the city, if the city started using on medians, they started using compost, that would actually help with flooding. And it would help with plants. It would help with watering. So I think that would be the number one thing to move the needle forward right now, is having a commitment from the public and private sectors to start using local compost.
Well, Tiffany Bess, founder of Apple Rabbit Compost, Christina Kelcourse, co-owner of Sunshine Organics and Compost. Thank you so much for being here today. I really
Thank
appreciate the
you.
lesson.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, I'd like to end it with just be grateful, not wasteful this holiday season.
All right. Great advice.